Hello and welcome to episode 16 of No Time to Cry. We're your hosts. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Laura.
And today's episode is about, I suppose it is grief. And the feelings that you have when you have to take a step away from somebody. So whether that be cutting off a family member or a friend, probably concentrate more on the family side, because I think we went into the friendship piece a little bit on a previous episode. And I know some of you will know my experience with having to take a step away from my dad even before he passed away. And the grief that I felt, maybe going into a bit more about the grief that I felt at that time before he'd even passed. So yeah, we wanted to dedicate just probably expanding a little bit on the different types of grief that there are. And many of you have commented about that on posts that we've done and have sort of felt like there was a real need to talk about it a bit more. I don't think it's spoke about very often. So
It's a bit of a taboo subject, isn't it?
yeah, because you get a lot of judging, I think, sometimes when you have to cut family off, because I would say it's an old school approach. Some may disagree that your family's your blood, so you should be there no matter
No matter
what,
what, yeah.
even if it costs you your own mental health or your own well-being or whatever piece you've got. Just to pre-warn you, Laura's ill.
Yeah, in case you haven't gathered that from the previous episode as well.
She's sick.
It sound awful. So yeah, sorry about that, but just bear with me sounding like
If you hear like
like an absolute gremlin. Yeah, apologies. That is me probably breathing. I'm struggling too.
yeah,
but I'm here. I've showed up, guys, for
yeah,
you.
she showed up.
Mm-hmm.
So we might try and keep it a slightly shorter episode just to save Laura's throat, nose, just everything
Yeah,
in
it's
general.
just the reserves that I have very little left within. So
Oh, bless you.
yeah,
But yeah, so we wanted to talk a little bit about that today. But I'm gonna put it on this section of the podcast that we would love to hear from you guys. I normally say this at the end, but I feel like it needs to be front and center of the beginning of the podcast, where we would absolutely love, before we get into anything else in regards to what this episode is about, just to hear from you and about your experiences of grief, about your loved ones. We'd love to add a section to the podcast where we get to talk about your loved ones. That doesn't have to be about how they've died or anything like that. It could just be about them. Maybe you want to use this as an opportunity to tell everybody about the person that you loved and unfortunately have lost, whether that be grief because they've passed, or maybe you've had to distance yourself, like we're going to follow on to, and what that's meant to you. But also maybe you want to share what your grief journey has been like, and we can read that out. Or if you've got any questions, write in, tell us. You can reach us on Instagram, Facebook, or you can give us an email. And if you email info@notimetocry.co.uk, we will get your emails through as well. So yeah, we'd just love to hear from some of you about your stories, and we can read that out. We wanted to have a few guests on, which I think will probably just come maybe a little bit later down the line, or possibly um online perhaps, because we've moved into a different space, and I don't know if we could fit somebody in the middle, but I don't think it'd quite
yeah.
logistically work. So we're thinking about how else can we get people engaged if we're going to struggle to get people actually on the podcast. Virtually, that's still an option, so that's something we're looking into. But we definitely love to hear about other people's experiences and have a chance to read them out. But yeah, I don't know, what's your thoughts, Laura, initially when we talk about like cutting people off? Like, what comes to your head when you think about that?
I guess we talked about on the previous episode. It was the previous episode, wasn't it?
I don't know
Or
what
the
you're
one
going to say.
prior.
So,
Of cutting people off, but like we said, sometimes unfortunately there is a need to have to do it, even if you really, really don't want to, and it can be quite heartbreaking to do. But ultimately, it might be the only option. And Shannon and I discussed on a previous episode, I think you should always give people the opportunity and to figure things out if it's safe for you to do so, and if it's
Yeah.
healthy to do so, right? So I'm not suggesting that if it's a very toxic or abusive relationship, that's very different. But um yeah, just try and have some of those confronting conversations where you can, because I think there is a bit of a culture nowadays of cutting people off without having some of those
Yeah.
harder conversations. And I've spoken to friends recently about it who've said the exact same thing. There are so many people that go through friendships that just suddenly disappear, and you sat there wondering why. And a lot of the times, these people aren't bad people. They've just had a disagreement that they maybe don't even know about. But more to Shan's point, when you lose a loved one, particularly when it's a family member, I think, maybe a partner as well, it impacts everybody within the family, and it impacts everyone differently. So you're affected in sort of a multitude of different ways. And obviously, people grieve differently, and some people don't understand why you're grieving the way that you are and how you're grieving. And if there were any sort of issues with a family member before you lose a loved one, then they are so much more heightened. Those problems have sort
Yeah.
of like a magnifying glass put on them. And unfortunately, as a result of losing my mum, again, from a place of respect, I'm not going to say who this person is, but I've had to distance myself from a very close family member, and I never wanted that to be the case, but
Mm.
I have done everything I believe in my power to try and make it work.
She's done more than enough.
But I couldn't. Yeah.
I think what's difficult, Laura, is you've had to address difficult conversations with yourself as to why you're having to do that, because it's so easy to just keep giving people the time of day, the benefit of the doubt. They wouldn't have meant that, they wouldn't have meant this, they didn't mean me any harm. But there comes sometimes, not always, there comes a point where you sort of have to say, I can't actually make any more excuses. There's nothing else I can say or do to justify the actions of certain individuals and what they say, and perhaps even who they surround themselves with, or whatever that looks like. um there always seems to be something that tips you over the edge when it comes to having to take that step away from someone.
Hmm.
uh, when you for your situation that you're talking about specifically, because we've spoke about before, grief does give you that hindsight where you go, what's important in life, what do I need, what do I love, who do I want to be around. It makes you just a bit more observant of things, and and because you need people around you, and you need that support network around you we've spoke about so often. It highlights certain behaviors that have maybe gone on for a very long time, that now you're starting to recognize, and then you go, "Mm, God, I'm not sure I'm in a place to keep putting
Yeah.
up putting up with this." And listen, I think I won't make you talk about it too much, Laura, because I know it's still quite a fresh situation for you and very, very difficult for you. But I wanted to ask your take on that, because again, our
Hmm.
situations of having to cut off very close family members are different. Yours has been kind of post grief, and mine was pre grief. And I think that they do have slight different edge to them, in terms of you've got I think you've got a different outlook after you've lost someone already. And
Yeah.
some would say it's even harder to cut a close family member off when you've just lost one. Like, if anything, that's the last thing you want to be doing. So when you're in a situation where you have to make that choice,
Feels paradoxical, doesn't it? And I know people say
that was a
that,
massive word, by the
but
way. Okay. I'll Google that afterwards, guys. It's fine.
um, yeah, sorry. It's just the instant word that came into my head. But yeah, so it's the word that came to my head because when you lose somebody the way that we lost our parents, there's sort of like an automatic assumption from people that you shouldn't feel like or want to lose anyone else. And obviously, you don't at all. It makes you so much more conscious of how precious and fragile life is, and that this is going to sound really sad, but everyone you love at some point won't be here anymore.
Mm,
So, from that perspective, I always believe that you've got to hold your loved and your close ones even closer and not take them for granted. But the flip side of it is that if you are being mistreated, if you are being treated in ways that actually you don't deserve in terms of the behaviors, the approach that somebody's taking towards you, even if they are blood related, there's only so much that you as a human being should tolerate.
mm. I just think as well, it's like you should hold your loved ones close, but not at the cost of
No.
losing yourself or losing respect for yourself or allowing people to mistreat you, you know.
It causes too much harm, and that's where I got to. I went through the hardest time of my life, and somebody that I always believed would be there for me wasn't there for me when my mum died.
Mm,
And that broke my heart. And do you know what? I forgave it, which is the mad
yeah.
thing. You know, for a long time, I made every excuse. I tried to see it from their point of view over and over and over again. And then I was just met with, yeah, just it was just awful messages, awful phone calls, being treated like I was the person that was in the wrong for needing some love and some support. Um, and I don't think I was asking for a lot.
No,
So,
and it's really easy to blame yourself and say, well, what did I do? What could I have
mm.
done better? But realistically, you're not in control of everybody else's actions. If people choose to treat you in that way, you have to take it on the face value. If they are in control of treating you like that, you're only in control of what you do, not everybody else. And I know that you can look back, Laura, and say there wasn't anything that you've, hand on your heart, done wrong in that situation. Definitely not on purpose. Um,
And this is the thing, and this is why I mentioned before, having some of those confronting conversations.
mm,
If you really love and care for somebody, yes, they're uncomfortable and they're really not nice to have, but you need to have them to know if is there a way to move forward, or do you have to say, do you know what, this is the time that we probably need to part ways because it's not working, basically.
but on top of that, I can't tell you how glad I am that I had those conversations with my dad and that had written a lot of it in text, because when he passed away, and naturally, when somebody takes their own life, there is always a, an area of guilt. I don't think it's possible to lose somebody in that way and not kind of feel any guilt towards it, certainly for a period of time at least. I was just dragging myself over so much stuff. And it wasn't until I went back through just a number of text messages with my dad and saw just so much stuff, which I like so much stuff, but a lot of my messages where I've had to lay out to him why I have had to take that step away and why we weren't able to talk and what I was asking for in return to be able to speak to him and have that relationship. It was all there. And it was almost like a bit of reassurance back to myself that he knew that it was written it right in front of him. If he wanted to go
You
back and
had the
read it, I had
conversation,
the
you were very clear.
conversation. Yeah, and listen, it's the hardest post, like pre losing my dad, it's the hardest thing I have ever had to do. Specifically because, listen, this might be a bit of a Marmite opinion. My dad really suffered with his mental health, without doubt, clinically, everything. Terrible, terrible mental health. He also suffered with addiction, so drugs, alcohol. Again, I believe that's an illness. But there was certain things that went on between myself, my dad, our relationship, that I don't think was necessarily down to those things. I think they were certain choices that he made, which some could say it could play into them. But I do think there's some just characteristics of people that also you can't
Mm.
blame on the fact that they've got mental health issues. You can't blame on the fact that they've got drug and alcohol issues. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of my dad's actions that I can put down to that. But there is another side of it that says, you are still my dad. I am the daughter in this scenario. There is only so much I can take and do. And I need you to have that self awareness to go, this is too much. I'm getting you involved in too much. And he just didn't have that clarity. So, which is fine. I think that does come down to some of his conditions, but some of the things that he was telling me at those times, he knew full well that he probably shouldn't have been sharing that with me. He'd said that to me on numerous occasions, but would carry on. So
Mm.
it was a really, really difficult situation that I was in. I was close to my dad for a very, very long time. Um, it wasn't an easy decision to have to take a step away from him, and it wasn't a overnight decision either. Initially, when I took a breathing space, it was going to be for a couple of weeks. Like, it was never a, this is a permanent, this is what I need. And it came on me going into therapy, and that was literally because I was a shell of a person. I was really broken. I was going for a really hard time with my dad. My dad was having a terrible patch. I think I'd mentioned on previous episodes, I tried really hard to get him into a rehab, was offering to pay for it, all those sorts of things. And he would say all the right things and then do none of the things that would say to me that he wanted the help. And, my dad was clean and sober for 7 years at one point. So he knew that the system worked. He knew if he went to rehab, he'd probably get well. I just don't think he was ready to
The
go
will
on.
wasn't there, was
Yeah,
it?
the will wasn't there, unfortunately. So there was a lot that went on during that time that I took a real kind of beating with, because of his mental health. I basically was the recipient to all of that. And I just was, the only way to describe it is I just was broken. I don't think that I sort of, if you spoke to me, I was vacant, very similar to when I went through grief. He'd kind of, I don't think it was on purpose by any account, but I'd almost taken on so much of his that it had taken all of mine. I had lost a lot of my, just, I didn't have enough energy to give to anything else because it was all being absorbed into my dad. And I think the final straw for me was, there was an incident that happened. Again, I won't go into detail because, he's not just my dad, he's my sister's as well, and he's brother of my uncle's. But there was a situation that happened, which involved me having to call the police and all these sort of things. It was a bit of a mad situation at the time, but he'd put himself in, he'd misbehaved, let's say that, and I'd had to call the police and get him some help, and he ended up being sectioned for a week or so. And I was just in the bath literally crying. Just so sad. But Jamie kind of came in and had a conversation with me. He's like, you can't keep doing this. Like, you've literally offered every single way possible. Like, even said he could come and stay with me, which would have been mental, but I had offered it because I just didn't know what else to do. I was going to put him in a rehab by me because he didn't like where he was. It was just a really, really mad time in my life. And he Jamie got me in touch with a therapist. I started speaking to Sue, who you've all heard about, and she pretty much said to me, "You need some space. Like, this has got so intense that you just need a little bit of space." She spoke to me about something called enmeshment, which I might have mentioned on the podcast before. I'm not sure. Um, which can be quite common in relationships, but can also be common between sort of parent-child relationships, all different sorts, where your emotions essentially hang on the person that you're sort of enmeshed with and how they're feeling, what they're doing, and you basically become like you're living for them, not for yourself. Um, and she said the only way to break that is to literally break contact because you're going to otherwise go back to old ways. And she never said to me that I had to do it. She never said to me that it had to be for a certain period of time. It was, I needed to put some boundaries in place. And as soon as my dad kind of honoured those boundaries, then that's when I could start speaking to him again. Unfortunately, my dad didn't know how to kind of stick to those. So every boundary I put in place in terms of, even if it was a week, I said, Dad, just give me a week. I just need a week to get my head together. I'm really suffering with my mental health. He'd call me the next day or text me the next day, and it'd be again, again, and again. So yeah, there was sort of probably about a year where we did that. Please give me the space, Dad. You're not giving me the space. I need the space. You're not letting me have it. Even on whose wedding day was it? Not your wedding day, maybe Paula's. Um, just battling my phone, bang, 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 bang. And he wasn't well, and they were kind of the caveats that I'd put in place is like, I need you to get well. I need you to stop drinking. I need you to stop doing all those things for me to be able to have a relationship with you, because it's just finding it very, very difficult. And he just couldn't do it. And there came a point where maybe a year into me trying to get some distance and still talking to him on a regular basis, just reasserting my boundaries. No, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. You keep showing me why I'm not ready yet, because you keep coming back with the same energy. And eventually, God, you feel bad saying it, but I think he probably got to a point where he was slightly harassing me. And again, he wasn't very well, but he was calling me sort of, I don't know, 7, 8 times a day from different
Right.
numbers, different people's Facebook accounts, different, drunk. He wasn't sober. He probably wouldn't remember the next day, like those kind of places. And I just literally had to say, it's no contact now. Like, I'm going to have to, unfortunately, put that in place where you can't contact me, because you're not listening to me. You're not saying to me the things that show me that you're going to, I'm going to be able to look after myself whilst being in contact with you. And you know what? I do put some blame on myself in that, in terms of, I think I was a crutch to him for quite a long period of time. And I allowed myself to let him lean on me for a very long period. I allowed him to do that. I allowed him to call me at 4 o'clock in the morning and I would always answer my phone. All these sorts of things for a long time, where I probably should have put boundaries in a lot easier. Listen, you can say that in hindsight. At the time, I didn't know what that looked like and how to do it. But yeah, cutting him off, really, which is what I had to do,
You just
was
thought you were
so
doing the right
difficult.
thing as well at the time,
Well, I had to do that. I don't think I would have. I think I would have ended up probably in a very, very, I probably would have had a full breakdown at some point, because I just wasn't looking after my own mental health. I was just so absorbed into what was trying to help him, even work. Like, I was at work, I was having to sort of run off out of the room, answer the phone, try and set up meetings with rehabs and different help centres, because, one day he'd say he wanted it, the next day he didn't. It was really, really all over the place. And then that period of time where I was kind of going, no, still need a bit more time, Dad. I still need a bit more time. Like, you're not, you're not working with me. I'm trying to work on myself. I need you to do the same. Like, I need you to meet me halfway. And gosh, I can't tell you how many conversations I had with my therapist where I was like, I don't know whether I'm ready to speak again, or do I try, or he's messaged me again. Do I reply this time? Do I go back? Do I ignore it? It was, gosh, I must have gone over it hundreds and hundreds of times in my head over that period. Like I say, it was the hardest thing that I ever chose to do, I would say. Obviously I didn't choose the grief of my dad, but like, I was choosing to kind of feel that grief at that time in taking that step back. And I don't regret that now, honestly, like, hand on my heart. I think there was a period of time after I lost my dad that maybe I questioned that a little bit, but I don't think it would have made him any better. And I think it would have made me really ill. So I think realistically we would have met, he still would have gone into the direction that he went in, because realistically, no matter what I said or did, even when I was speaking to him, it wasn't actually helping.
No, and I think even though you were doing your best to be there for him and to be emotionally supportive and to give him, well, to just be a sounding board for him a lot of the time. You were trying to help him navigate some really difficult and challenging times, but at the same time, without you meaning to do it, you were sort of facilitating
100%.
them as
100%
well.
I was facilitating it because I was almost, like I say, I was allowing him to come to me and kind of take that advice. And I used to say my dad would come and speak to me when he wanted to hear the hard truth because I'm honest. I've always been like that. You know, some would say maybe there's like set in my brain where I don't know where that kind of like that stop mark is, but um you know, I've always been very honest. I've never been brutally honest. I'll always do it with a kind of a bit of heart behind it. I've always been quite an emotional person where I'll listen and think, oh, you know, whatever. But I would always give my dad the other side of the coin. It would never be what he wanted to hear. If I agreed with him, I agreed with him, but there was a lot I didn't agree with.
Yeah.
And he would come to me and tell me about it, knowing for a fact that I would say to him, you shouldn't have done that, Dad. Like, you shouldn't have treated that person that way. You shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have done that thing. Um, you know, what did you think I was going to say when you told me? Like, I don't know what you were kind of looking for. Or I would say, I'd always spin it on him and say, you know, let's just say it's a woman. My dad had many girlfriends over the years. So, you know, if you're
Ladies man
listening, it
John.
might not be about you. It could be about one of the other 20. Um, you know, if Jamie did that to me or said that to me or treated me that way, how would you react? Well, I'd go off my head. Exactly. So you have to remember that's what you've done. So take some accountability for it. And they were always the kind of conversations that we would have. It was where I would feel like I was helping, I'd feel like I was giving good advice. And then you'd come away and would he listen? No.
You were great at giving a good reality check, though, most
Yeah.
definitely. But like
But
you
it doesn't
say,
help in that situation.
it
Like, I
doesn't.
felt like I was helping. I felt like I was the one that he came to when he really needed help. But
But where else do you go, Shannon? This is the point,
yeah,
isn't it? It's sort of, you do get to a point in life where you can help a loved one, a family member, a friend as much as you can, but if it's damaging, those are the times when actually you do have to call out whether you continue with it or you make a change to.
and I don't think it needs to be an overnight decision. Like
No.
you've heard from me there, it took me over a year to say to my dad, there is no more going back and forth. Contact me when you have been clean and sober for at least 3 months.
That's it, and that's some really genuine, authentic care, right? And this is what we were talking about previously. Sometimes we've spoken to people recently, friends, haven't we, that have said they've
Gosh, yeah.
been ghosted by other friends and
Sometimes family members, by the way.
sometimes family members, and it'll have happened overnight and they genuinely can't pinpoint or figure out what they've done. And that could genuinely be the case. But then there are other scenarios like the two that Shannon and I are referring to where it was progressive. It wasn't a
Yeah.
case of, oh, all of a sudden we just decided that we didn't want the relationship. If anything, we fought and we fought and we fought and tried to make it possible to keep them in our lives. But at the same time, you have to think, is it worth it if it's going to cause you both hurt?
Well, some part of me thinks, did
So,
they
no.
create their own destiny with that? Because
Yeah, potentially.
it was almost like there was plenty of opportunities to stop it getting
Exactly.
to that point.
And that's the difference, isn't it? I think if you on your hand on heart are sitting there thinking, I genuinely don't know what I've done wrong. I feel you, and then that's really, really painful. But then if you can put your hand in your heart and think, actually, I did have these conversations. I was told a number of times that my behaviour wasn't quite in the right order and it was hurting somebody that I, supposedly love, then I do think in that scenario, if you really care and that person's a priority to you, then you make the changes that
Yeah.
you need to. Unfortunately, whether it's intentional or not, you aren't always going to be someone's priority. And that is true for
Yeah.
family as well and for blood. And this is why Shannon and I have said, oh, you should never cut anyone out of your life, particularly family when you've lost your mum, when you've lost your dad. But it's like, do you not understand how painful that is to hear to somebody? Because when you've lost a loved one, it does make you realize that you want to keep the people that you care the most about in your life. And sometimes it doesn't mean that you don't care about people, but there are some people that you can't have in your life once you've been through
I
this
think
sort of
it's
stuff.
all about boundaries. Like, I was speaking literally just before I came here, funny enough, I was having a conversation with someone about boundaries and sort of saying to them, listen, you've got to put a boundary in place. You're going to end up getting really, really poorly. That was between them and a family member as well. I said, you're going to have to do something because I can see it. When you're speaking to someone and they're like half a second away from bursting into tears. And they said to me, I'm really worried that they're going to stop speaking to me if I put that boundary in place. And I said, listen, if you put a boundary in place that says, I have to do this to look after myself, I just need to see you maybe one less day a week because this is really overwhelming for me, or whatever it is. If they choose to no longer speak to you because you're doing something to look after yourself, family or not, they don't deserve to be in your company.
And that actually speaks volumes about how much they actually
Of
care.
course it does.
And this is the other thing I've talked about recently with another friend of mine, is that some people love the idea of loving and caring for somebody because they think they should,
Mm.
but sometimes they don't. And it's
That's
the
a very
same.
narcissistic trait, I think, for a lot. And
Yeah.
as you get older and you learn more about these different characters, I could list at least 5 or 6 narcissists I've met in my life. Like, you just become more aware of them, and I think
Yeah.
there is a lot of um people that I've come across that do things not because they want to, like to, because they think that it makes them appear a certain way if they do
Yeah. It's
something,
just a huge facade,
or
isn't it?
that they should be doing something, but they don't really want to. But it's almost like, oh, well, I've got that title,
Yeah,
so
the
this is
entitlement is a
what's,
huge one, isn't it? It's like,
yeah.
oh, well, I am this person, so that automatically means I have rights to X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, no, like, you still have to be a good person in order to gain trust, in order to be in the life of people who are precious to you or should be precious to you. And actually, if you're going to constantly overstep the mark, like Shan said, in terms of boundaries being set, and you're not willing to adhere to them, or you just think that person doesn't, you know, you don't respect them enough to try and stick to what somebody's requested of you for X amount of time because they're trying to protect themselves, and actually you don't really care about them at all.
No,
So
and I mean, the other side of it is like the impact on you when you do cut somebody off, because I think we've spoke about why you have to do that, and that's super important. But actually, there is some things that I would still say you have to deal with. They're not easy, but the benefits of cutting someone out who's causing you a lot of pain, from my experience, have always outweighed the pain that you have to go through um in terms of making that choice. And that's not every day you feel like that, but in general, overall, it, for me personally, it has felt like that. But there's certainly times, especially when it's family members, where you feel like you lose some of your identity, because especially if you've done something so long for a period of time. There's people that, for instance, let's just use another example, would go to their mum's house every single Sunday, even though their mum's horrible to them. They make really bad comments, whatever it is. Let's just use that as an example. They're not nice to them. They make you feel like crap, but you've always done it. So it's always, you've had to go around and you're like, oh God, I'm dreading it. I know it's going to be another Sunday where I walk out feeling this big.
mhm.
So then when you finally made that huge step to say, I can't keep doing this anymore, like, it's making me feel really bad about myself. I feel really horrible. I've had a conversation about it. They've told me I'm making it all up, or it's not true, or whatever it is. Then when you get to your first Sunday, you might go, oh God, what a relief. But there is a part of you that goes, what do I do with myself now? What do I for me with my dad, when I wasn't helping my dad, it's like I said last episode, I had that real, oh God, I feel more anxious for a little bit because I've
Yeah.
not got that what's going on. I think I have that more now because when my dad was still alive, I think I still had that in the back of my head. Oh God, I wonder what he's doing. Am I going to get a phone call from someone that he's been arrested or whatever it is?
It's that feeling of dread, but
Yes.
it's the same as, like you say, Shannon, waiting for that call. But if you're dreading meeting somebody or seeing somebody that you know, supposedly love and care about, family, friend, then that's not right either. You shouldn't dread meeting up with somebody or seeing
No.
someone. There's something wrong there, and if you unfortunately are in a situation where you do have to cut someone off, whether it's temporarily, whether it's for a certain amount of time, or
Yeah.
if you decide actually that's a long term thing, I do believe a part of that dread is lifted if you've made the ultimate right
I
decision.
agree.
Otherwise, you know, you do still have the opportunity to reflect on it, provided you still go about it the right way. That you might think, actually, I'm ready to try and reintroduce that person to my life. You
You're
might
going to
decide,
laugh at this
no.
so much. This reminds me of a conversation I had with my therapist when I'd first sort of stopped speaking to my dad. It was maybe 6 months in. I said to her, I'm really worried that if I let him back in, that I'm going to go back to how I was. And I've come so far in terms of self development. And she said, Shannon, you are so black and white. Why does you speaking to your dad again mean that if he starts to overstep those boundaries again that you've put in place, that you can't ask for some distance and take another step back? And I was like, I'm not going to lie, that never even came into my head.
Yeah, it's not an absolute. You don't.
But my head is,
Yeah.
but the way that I had to kind of come to terms with that, you know, unfortunately we never got to that point where I was quite ready to you know, to have him come back in because he just never really got well enough. But in my head, if I step back in, then I'm back in it. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? Like if I'm gonna go, yeah,
You're
you're
all or
back in my life.
nothing.
Yeah, yeah,
That's why, and I get where you're coming from on that, and that's fine for you, Shan. I think people have different personalities and different ways of,
yeah. I'm trying not to be as much like
yeah.
that, but
Yeah, but then there's other sides of it, aren't there? Where, like you say, you led up to it progressively. There, you were really
oh,
conscious of
100%. I think it was the
how you did it.
anxiety of letting him back in was more of a I think because I knew that he hadn't come very far. So this was all sort of hypothetical conversations that I was having with my therapist. You know, if he does get better,
Mm.
what if I slip back into, you know, maybe he's come far, but what if I end up slipping back just by having him in my, you know, it back in
In
my
your
life?
life,
Maybe
yeah,
that triggers a lot of things for me. And she was just like, well, then you take another step back. Like,
yeah,
it's not, it doesn't have to be he's in or he's out. And I find it so weird because as soon as she said it, I was like, oh, obviously. But
yeah.
my brain is just one of those brains that I'm kind of, I
You're in or
think,
you're out.
yeah, I'm in it or I'm out of it. And I'm rarely out of it is my problem. I'm in a lot of things. I'm quite like my brain's so intense. So it's difficult for me. I think then once I do get out, I then think, shit, how do I
Yeah,
get back
it's
in?
probably it's
Like,
quite a
how do I get
scary
back
thing, I
in?
think, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
and it makes you apprehensive, and time is a tricky one as well with it. You know, when you've spent a certain amount of time away from somebody, as we've said before, with the friendship side of things, it can feel more difficult to repair.
Yeah. I mean, do we want to give a small update or not on
Yeah.
this is slightly off topic, guys, but it's still on the same topic of cutting people off. You may remember we did an episode on friendships where we spoke about different individuals that unfortunately we didn't really know what happened and they distanced themselves. We have been in contact with one of those individuals who, fair play to them, they like reached out to us, which we did open, didn't we? We said on the podcast, you know, feel free to reach out. I'm not sure either of us thought that they would.
No.
So it did come as a little bit of a shock, but
It meant a lot though.
it did mean a lot. And I think what it allowed us to do is get some closure on that situation.
For all of us as well,
Yes.
not just for Shannon and I think for yeah, for everyone involved in that situation, I do think we all feel a little bit better from the point of view that there is some closure and there's no bad blood, as we've always said, and
Yeah.
we'll always have care for that person. But it's just good to know that it goes a long way to know that there wasn't anything sinister sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes things
So
just happen.
that's why I would encourage that conversation early on, because, all three of us played a part in just letting that sort of go and not really addressing
Yeah.
why did this happen? Did we want to talk about it? Did we not? And that individual, obviously, I'm not going to go into the conversation that we have because that's private, but certainly gave us a lot more understanding of what was going on and took a hell of a lot of accountability as well. Like, fair play.
Everyone's human. Like we've said, we're
Yeah.
not perfect. We're not gonna always make the right decisions and deal with these situations and scenarios in the right way the first time, especially when you experience them
Mm,
for the first time. You're trying to figure out, well, how do you navigate this? And when
yeah.
your friends or family haven't been through something similar, it's really difficult to know where to start, isn't it? So
But to caveat that, like Laura said, when time has passed, I think part of the conversation I will share is that all of us kind of felt we don't necessarily need to try and rekindle
no,
things
yeah,
per se. It's been 2 years or a year and a half or whatever it is. It feels like a lifetime since we, um, had that friendship there. And I think it was just nice to have some closure to it as to what happened. And I don't think any of us are like, right, okay, so let's just go out for dinner next week
yeah, because
or
maybe that's a worry
whatever it
actually
is.
for some people. I guess if you are in a situation where you're distant from a friend right now, but you always think about them, because let's be honest, we all do.
Yeah,
Sometimes the best thing to do is to reach out. And you know what? If you don't get a response, then that is a response, like they say. No response.
100%.
Silence is what you probably needed to hear. To know that you've done what you can, and if you don't get anything back, you're not in control of that. But then the other side of it is like Shannon and I just discussed that you could get something in return that just makes you all feel so much better.
Yeah. And I
So
think from that individual side, they were quite happy with how we responded to them, because I think you've got to go into everything with just a kind heart and
yeah,
plenty of understanding and willing to hear people out. And I think it takes a lot for somebody to reach out as well over what's been a long period of time. So,
there's no expectation there, though, is there? There's no expectation, like you say, Shan, of
no.
everything just reverting back to what it was, because sometimes there is that saying, isn't there, about friendships for a reason, a
Yeah, of
season, and all
course.
that kind of stuff. And sometimes you have friendships that are just for a part of your life, and they're still really special.
And
And
you can
you'll
appreciate them still.
yeah, and it's okay that they were just part of a chapter of your life. So
But what I would say is if you this whether it be friends or family or whatever, if you cut somebody off and at that time, not due to risk or anything like that, listen, like Laura said, if you're removing yourself from a dangerous situation, please, this is not the same
totally
advice
different.
that we would give in that scenario. But maybe if you removed yourself from a friendship or a family member and did that with no real announcement, or there didn't feel like perhaps there could be some confusion on the other party side as to why you did that. Maybe it was super clear for you. It's been something that's built up over a period of time, but maybe they are just completely unaware to what was going on. If you feel comfortable to do so, I can't tell you how much peace that kind of brought me and Laura in terms of understanding and um yeah, just I think giving us better understanding. Maybe the situation's slightly different though, because I think that individual that reached out to us wasn't necessarily telling us all the things that we'd done wrong as to why they'd taken a step back. But I think I would have received that had they have said that and said this is the reason why this happened, that happened, whatever it was, and I did feel like you could have done this or that. I think I would have accepted that as
And
well
it's your
because
opportunity to take that away and to put it right. Again, it's an
and
accountability thing, isn't
listen,
it?
how they react tells you everything. If somebody hears that and goes, fuck off, no, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, and doesn't want to take any form of accountability, then like maybe that gives you some confidence in that you cutting that individual out was the right thing for you to do, and you can live with no sort of voice in the back of your head like, should I have said
Yeah,
something, should I have
no
whatever.
regrets, and that is the flip side, and I can speak to that. You know, as I've said, I'm not going to go too much into the details of it, but I've been very explicit about the situation that I've had with one particular family member. It's gone on for a long time. I tolerated a lot of stuff, and everyone around me was saying, "Why do you tolerate?
Mm.
Why are you going back to that person?"
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even in black and white, even with the receipts, is like the kids say nowadays
Laura,
that.
stop making us out as if we're
No,
80.
but we're not like,
We can say receipts.
yeah, okay, well, receipts um of stuff that had happened, and I'd in my head I'd be like,
It's
is there
delusional.
something wrong with me? And you know, Shan's seen all this, heard all this, been there for some of these occasions, and she was like, that is just delulu. Literally,
Yeah,
it's just
it's
mental that
delusional.
somebody just cannot understand how much what they're saying is so vile and nasty and awful to you. And then there's me all the time thinking, oh, they just said that because they didn't mean it and they were going through this, and I got to a point where, and this is one of the very small positives that I'd say I've got from grief, and I believe it's mum, like telling me to stand up for myself. I used to like just tolerate so much bullshit, and now I'm like, no, that's not okay. And whether you're blood related or not, I'm taking a step away from that because I don't want that in my life, and I don't want that in my. I've got two little girls. I want to
Mm,
make sure they're surrounded by the right people and with the right love and morals and respect for people, and not people that just think that they're owed something
mm.
when they've never done anything to actually gain that.
Perhaps that's a different angle. If you're sat here and you were somebody that was cut off,
Mm.
and the one thing I would say, listen, let's talk for family for a second, because I think friendships, there's loads of different dynamics as to why that can kind of distance itself and things like that.
Family is very complicated.
Yeah. If you're a family member and you have been cut off, I don't know very many people, bar the 6 or 7 narcissists that I've met, who could cut somebody off with no reason as to why they've had to do that. No prior warning, have shown no signs of being in finding that relationship difficult.
Especially
It's
when it's
not been,
multiple people as well that have to cut
yes,
a person off.
exactly. Um, I think you've got to take a long, hard look at yourself and try and look at your behavior and say, what's gone on here? Let's not try sweep this all under the rug, because I think there is a lot of people that do that. And listen, whether this was my dad's mental health or not, I can't tell you, but there was definitely a period of time where my dad sent me a number of text messages as if he was confused as to why I'd had to take a step back. And I was thinking, I don't think I could have made it any fucking clearer. um, and
Yeah.
I had to say to my dad, listen, I love you so much. Do not make me list the reasons why I've had to do this, because it will hurt you more than it will hurt me. And I
Mm.
don't want to have to do that to you. So don't push me to do it, Dad. And I had
It's
to say to
painful
him,
enough as it
yeah,
is.
it's painful enough for me to do this. Don't think that I could do this with no reason. I've been there for you my whole entire life. Like, I've not just made this decision overnight. I've tried and tried and tried. And that was one of my last text messages to my dad. And I said, listen, like, this, you've got a full text message history here. You've only got to go up 3 or 4, Dad, to see some of the conversations that we've had. Like, I feel like I've made it really clear I love you. And this was where I found some peace in these text messages. I love you. I want you in my life. I am not doing this to be difficult. I am not doing this to be mean. I am struggling myself, and I need you to be healthy and well for me to have you in my life, because it triggers me that you're not. You don't, I had a whole childhood where I had to deal with that, and then 7 years where I didn't, and it brought a lot of crap back up for me from when I was a kid. But you don't, it's quite difficult to have some of those confronting conversations with your parents because I think, listen,
It's unusual. It's an unusual dynamic. It's
it's
an
an
unusual
unusual
position to be
dynamic,
in.
but I do think that sometimes parents have a habit of making out things are not as bad as they have been, in terms of, oh gosh, I can't tell you, you know, how many conversations I've had with either of my parents where you remember something as a kid and they're like,
Yeah, it did happen
"Dunno-
like
what are you talking about?
that.
That never happened." And you think, I literally remember it.
Especially if you remember them as a child as well. I
Yeah.
think that says a lot, doesn't it? If that's like ingrained in your brain and in your memories. And
Yeah.
and like you say, Shan, sometimes when you have to cut people off as well, it doesn't mean that you don't absolutely love the bones of
I
them and care for
adored
them.
my dad, adored him. And if I could have found any other way of keeping him in my life
Yeah, you
without,
would have.
yeah, without harming myself, I would have done it. I did do it. I did do it for God knows how many years. But eventually, it just bit by bit by bit, it chipped away at me.
It depletes everything you've got,
Yeah.
and this is kind of similar to what I've been through recently, hasn't it, Shan? Like,
Yeah.
I never wanted to step away from this person. I love them so very much. You know, will always want the best for them. I care about them deeply in my heart of hearts, but it just wasn't.
It's not
It
healthy.
wasn't. It was not healthy, and I just I couldn't do it anymore. I just thought, now I'm a mum myself, and I have my own two little girls. I just think
Do you
I've
have
got to be the best version of myself for them. I've got to put them
100%.
first.
Have you felt any judgment when you've spoke to people about having to cut off a certain family member? Have you felt any judgment in that from people?
Do you know what? No, not yet.
I have.
But
I
I think
didn't.
because people have sort of understood and seen that person wasn't there for me through the hardest time in my life, they also made, you know, the birth of one of my children quite difficult. So,
Yeah.
you know, people that sort of know me on that level, even if they don't know a huge amount about me, you know, people pick up on vibes and feelings and that sort of stuff. And I've actually had some people say to me, "You should have done it sooner." Actually,
I think I was one of those people.
yeah. So yeah, I'm sure there will be people that think, of course, you know, I'm not, and fair enough to them, they don't understand or know what's going on. So I understand how it looks from an outsider's
Yeah.
perspective sometimes when you see, oh, why is that family sort of as why have they drifted? But there's always a reason. I always think for anyone who has to cut off a family member, and I think it's slightly different to friendships.
Yeah.
There's
There's
all
probably 10 years worth of shit that's gone on before they've
Yeah,
done
you've
it.
you with family, like I think, like I said, there is a bit of a culture now. I think of people just sort of letting go with friendships. With family, it's a lot more. There are a lot more intricacies in terms of
Hmm.
how you do it because there's other people that are impacted. There's other people that will have an opinion on it. You've got to go to events and family things where you'll see them. Whereas there are some instances with friends where you might not see
Oh,
them
you
for
might never
years,
cross
or you might
paths
never
ever
cross
again.
paths again. Yeah, so there is a different dynamic with family, but that's what makes it even more of an important decision to make and to try and navigate and approach it in a way that you're proud of, but that actually you don't have any regrets with either.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And I don't think you can consistently feel one way or the other
no,
because there will always be periods of time. And I know you've gone back on things a few times, Laura, and
so many.
try to pick that conversation back up and had to go, no, 100% I'm making the right choice. Jesus. I think that's natural when it comes to family. I think there's always a bit of toing and froing. Can we make it work? Can we try? Can we not? Can we this? Can we that? And I also know family members, like not in my family, but friends of mine who didn't speak to a family member, like a mum, for 11 years.
And it might not be forever. And I've always said this, and again to this person, you know, like I
Well,
don't,
no, that's sorry. I
I don't
kicked my
want it to be
laptop. I've
forever,
cut that
but
out. But when I said they've not spoke to their mum for 11 years, they've now rekindled that relationship and now they are closer than
than
before.
before, yeah.
But what I will caveat that with is have both done a lot of self work. One of them's done a lot of therapy, actually now a therapist, and the other one has done a lot of internal work and things like that. And I think they have both grown, worked on
Mm.
themselves, and found it possible to come back. I think if you've done a lot of work on yourself, and then the other individual that you've taken a step away from has done none, then
Yeah.
that distance gets even bigger.
Yeah.
Because how
True.
can you rebuild something? You're so far from that, from all those ways that you previously took it on or, made excuses for, whatever it is. Then you've taken yourself away. It's cost you a lot personally in terms of to do that. Certainly for me, my ego was definitely hurt taking a step away from my dad. 100%. That's a big part of it. My ego was like, I
You
couldn't make
never
him
want to
better.
do. You never
I
want
couldn't
to
do
do
it.
that.
So you take a bit of an ego battering because you've not been able to make it work. You've not been able to put up with it. You've had to take a step away. If anyone says that their ego doesn't get hurt by cutting someone off, I think you're lying, because it's human nature to say, I want to be able to fix this relationship. I want to be able to make this work. And when you have to admit to yourself that you can't, and the only way to look after yourself is to essentially half give up on that relationship and that individual for a period of time until you can come back, that 100% hits you somewhere.
It must do, and especially because, again, from a family perspective, people will ask you, "How's that family member?" And then what do you do?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
oh,
I'll just say he's dead. No, I'm
and,
joking.
Jesus
Sorry.
Christ. Oh, but yeah, obviously you've got to sit there and be like, "What do you do? What do you?"
Sorry, that was so bad.
Intrusive thoughts.
Yeah.
Do you sit there? I always think this. Does that person sit there and pretend they know how I am, or
Some people will. A narcissist
or
will.
do they sit there and say, are they honest and say, right now I'm not too sure because we aren't in a place where we're.
I always wonder, what do they say though? Because I think there is a part of I've certainly experienced it where sometimes they make up a little story
No, probably. 'Cause
that
I know,
makes them look
I
good.
know somebody like unfortunately, in these sorts of situations, you get people that try and stalk you as well. So, uh,
Hi. No.
we know it happens.
Yeah,
So
of course it does.
clearly, we're that you're still on somebody's mind if that's happening. But
I do think there was some people that would sit there and go, oh, well, I'm the best person ever, and this horrible individual's taken themselves away because they just don't care
oh
about
yeah,
me. And it's like, hold on a second, people that don't know you personally might buy into that, but anybody that's met you would sort of go, really?
mm.
I can't imagine that to be the case. Are you sure that's yep, because
It's even
I couldn't do it.
it's mad, isn't it? Though, 'cause it's even when you like people have been there in certain situations, and you still get people who say, "Oh, I wouldn't do that. I didn't say that," and you just think it is impossible to have a relationship with somebody that has that
Well,
type of
this is what
mindset.
I was saying. I think sometimes when you are in the wrong, it's very easy to make up a story in your head as to why you've had to act certain ways and now that person's cut you off. I think it's a protection piece. I think it's someone not wanting to face the fact that maybe you're not talking to them because they've done something wrong. So they make a story up in their head, and then it gets to a point where they believe that. And then they
Yeah.
hold some resentment towards you for things that you haven't done. But that's what they've had to tell themselves to allow themselves to feel comfortable with the fact that you've removed yourself from them, because it's easier to blame someone else than take the accountability yourself and say, do you know what? Hands up, I fucked up.
It's so
I
sad when it's
did this
family, though,
wrong.
isn't it? It
Of
really is
course it
so sad
is.
when families literally break down because of this type of stuff. It's just
But listen,
heartbreaking.
hopefully, we're not the only people that have been through this. I know for a
Oh,
fact
and
most
definitely
of them
not.
we're definitely not.
The
I know
amount
it
of
happens a lot with
conversations I've
siblings
had
and as
recently.
well, right? I'm very close with my sister now. You're obviously very close with your siblings, but I know friends of mine that don't speak to their siblings because of
Mm.
things like this. Have had to stop speaking to certain family members like that because, you know, a multitude of issues, whether it be mistreating family, mistreating
Mm.
their sibling, calling names, saying really horrible stuff, which as adults we should be way past in terms of doing, like petty arguments when you're kids is very different when you're sort of like in your 20s and 30s and still bickering like you're 12.
Yeah, it's like you move on, don't you? There's definitely things that relationships that I handled probably not in the best way when I was younger. But
Of course not.
now, gosh, like, I'm completely different with how I deal with those sorts of things. And ultimately, you've got to surround yourself with other people who are on that same wavelength. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you can't have a healthy relationship.
And I think it's really important to have people around you which support you in having to make some of those really difficult decisions. If you're on the verge of cutting someone off, or you have just, try and find people that support you in that and understand you. Or, if you're not much of a sharer, I would try sharing a bit more. I know it's easy to say, I'll just share more, but actually you'll be surprised how many people will understand you if you articulate it in the right way in
And
terms of the
the views will
impact.
change because it
Yeah,
does sound pretty
of
cutthroat sometimes. If it's like, oh, I just
course it
had
does.
to cut this person off, but then if you have to sort of, well, you shouldn't ever have to feel like this, but it is always useful sometimes to be able to say, this is the reason why, ultimately,
Yeah.
because yeah, you will just get a different reception.
Well, listen, if I said to any of you guys, without any context of my story with my dad committed suicide and I didn't speak to him the year before he died because I just chose not to, that sounds awful.
Yeah, yeah, and that's obviously
With
not at
no
all what happened.
context, that sounds like, God, like, did you not care about your dad? Did you not like? I could understand on the face value, you
Yeah,
could easily sit there and judge me for that, right? Whereas everybody around me, that even when I had some of those thoughts myself after my dad died, was like, Shannon, shut the fuck up. There's literally nothing more you could have done in that situation. You had to do that. You had, like, because they had the context of what went on. And that helped me so much, because your brain can be one of those places where you're so judgmental on yourself and you put all your decisions under pressure. Why did you do that? Why do you think that way?
yeah, you're already
Having,
so self-critical, aren't you?
yeah, and having a sounding board of people going, but what would have happened to you if you had kept doing that? If you'd kept allowing that person to, you know, keep making excuse for them, let them carry on saying really horrific things, whatever it
That's where I got
is,
to, wasn't it?
yeah, then you have to address that, and you have to have that conversation with yourself. But having peers around you that say, hold on a second,
Mm.
why are we sat there saying I'm a bad person? Have we forgot what that individual said and did 6 months ago? And that's not to mean that you can't forgive and move forward and all those sort of things if it's the right thing to do. But I think it's really important to try and get those people around you that kind of back you up a little bit and say, no, I think you got to this place because of XYZ. You didn't make this decision overnight. You have every right to question it, query it, see if it's still right for you to do it. But realistically, there was a reason why. It's like when you break up with an ex and people say, they're an ex for a reason. Something happened. You
Mm.
had to do that. Don't forget those things. You can forgive, but I do think you should always, you shouldn't forget. You should have that context of what happened. Why did I have to make that decision? And having people around you that kind of back that up, but in a positive way, make you feel heard, make you feel seen, is really, really important. And I think you find those relationships by opening up. So have some confidence that when you do open with up, I think it only brings you closer to people and helps
And
you
you're not
have
on your
reassurance.
own. Like, it's a very taboo subject, as we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, and it's very, very vulnerable and raw to talk
Yeah.
about it. But even just having conversations with three different people, actually, just over the last week, they had all been through some type of friendship, family breakdown. So it just goes to show it's very, very, very common as well.
I don't
It's
know
just
if
not
if
spoken
I
about.
think about all my closest friends, I don't think I can think of one of my friendships where they've not got at least one family member that they don't speak to.
Mm.
Maybe I surround myself with a lot of people that are just cutting people off, but
Broken people.
broken people. But when I
No,
think
true.
about it, whether that be absent dads that they've no longer speak to, or siblings, or mums, even all different. I genuinely can't think of anyone in my inner circle that
No,
doesn't
I can't actually.
not speak to at least one family member.
No. Yeah.
But we don't
No.
talk about it very often, do we? Because it's like, it's awkward. It is awkward. But that's the truth in the matter. So I think it doesn't always have to be a build up of things like me and Laura. Sometimes it's just
Could be something
morally and
quite serious.
values and
Yeah. Like criminal.
yeah,
activity.
100%. Like sometimes you just have to look and go, if I wasn't related to you, would I choose to spend any of my time with you? No.
Yeah.
And if that's your answer, then you've got to weigh up why you're surrounding yourself with that person on a regular basis if you are, because it's a bit like, well, are you doing it because you feel like you've got a duty to? Because I don't think that that's necessarily a good enough reason to surround yourself with someone that's maybe making you feel really rubbish. So, yeah. But anyway, that was probably a bit longer than we expected. But I think it's a really important topic, and it's probably something we'll cover even more in the future, because I do feel like you could talk about it all day. And there was somebody that commented on a video we posted that, which was why we ended up speaking about this, because it felt like there was like a bit of a reaction to it in terms of sort of saying, when you cut somebody off, nobody talks about like how hard it is to stand by that when you didn't want to do it in the first place, and you were kind of, your hand was forced. And somebody commented on it saying, yeah, I've just had to cut all my family off, and I literally don't know what to do with myself. Like, I don't know who I am, I don't know what to do. And I don't think there's a right answer on what to do or how to handle that. I think that's got to be a personal decision. I'm sure
I
you'd
think that's
agree.
where time does. You know what I'm like. With
Oh my god, she hates this saying. Are you going to say time's a healer?
Yeah, well, it isn't for grief, definitely not. But I do think with relationships on this front, time does help. It does.
Yeah, because you get to know yourself.
Yeah, and you see sort of how you feel afterwards. The first week of having to take yourself out of a difficult relationship feels a bit rubbish. You're thinking, should I text them? Should I message them? Should I reach out? Second week, I'm not thinking about it quite as much. Third,
yeah, or you might
week,
feel a bit of a weight lifted in some occasions for a short period, and then you go back.
My anxiety, as soon as this is going to sound awful to say it, but it's true, because, and like I say, I still very much love this person, but as soon as I stopped speaking to them, I felt a weight lifted.
Yeah.
My anxiety of like hearing from them, receiving abuse, whatever it was, I didn't have to worry about getting that anymore. And they didn't have to worry about sending it.
Yeah.
So
maybe they're typing it out still, just
maybe,
bouncing back. But yeah, it's a really difficult conversation, and I don't think there's kind of a right way to deal with it either. I think it is very similar to grief in that you've kind of just got to take it as it is and see how you feel. But, dedicate that time to get to know yourself outside of that situation, because I do think, especially when it's family, those people mold you in some ways. Either you might find some similarities, or you might find the complete opposite because of that. And I think it's really important to dedicate that time to get to know you because of you, not because of your family, right? Or whoever that is. It's who am I when I get to choose who I want to be and who I surround myself with? And that's when you, I believe, truly fall in love with yourself and get to know yourself a lot better. And that's where you can feel a lot more comfort in your decisions and choices.
And spend more time with the people that want to be around your true self, and that real version of you as well, because that's important. You need to surround yourself with the people that
love you for
you, yeah.
And don't try to change you. Anyway, what a lovely way to finish. But yeah, give us a follow, give us a like. We'd really appreciate it. If you can subscribe as well, that would be amazing. If you can subscribe to us on YouTube, it's No Time to Cry Pod. And yeah, we just hope you're all having a lovely day. And I will repeat, if you've got any stories you want to tell us that you'd like us to read out or talk about, we'd love to hear from you. I'm sure you're sick of hearing about me and Laura now. Although some of you seem to love it. I keep sharing things on my own social media saying, me just oversharing on the internet again. Somebody has to. Somebody's got to do it. But yeah, thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.